equal opportunity, which in fact you do not, correct?
Yes.
What you oppose, as I understand it, and as your book very plainly states, is any preferential treatment that disguises objective standards. Is that correct?
Yes, and particularly since the net effect of the preferential treatment, which is preferential in intention more so than in results, is that those blacks who are particularly disadvantaged have fallen further behind under these policies, that such policies have typically benefited those blacks who were well off, who became better off. And this is true also in other countries. In India, there's a program in Bombay, and someone who wrote about this commented that this program is for the benefit of the clerks, not the coolies. But that's been true in general, and that's what's true in the United States. That it's not the coolies that benefit, it's the clerks that benefit, who then aspire to higher occupations. For example, blacks who have relatively less work experience, lower levels of education, black female-headed families, all these groups have fallen further behind during a decade or more of affirmative action. Black female-headed families have had an absolute decline in real income over this span and have fallen further behind white female-headed families. At the same time, black couples who are both college educated earn higher incomes than white couples who are both college educated. So that this whole program makes it, provides incentives to hire blacks who are safe. Therefore, one will make some effort towards one's quota, but one will not take in people who might not progress enough for their promotions and discharge patterns to satisfy the government. So you make it risky to hire average blacks and more desirable to hire blacks who have not privileges, but advantages.
Well, now, do you ascribe to the programs of the past 10 years that polarization? Because if so, how does that account for the apparent correlation between those families, those black families that do not do well, and the vastly increased number of one-parent black families?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, during the past 10 years, we've had affirmative action. Mm-hmm. We have also had we've also had a rise of between 21 to 37% of families, black families, that have a single parent.
Yes.
I.e., there's been a desertion by the male, by the father.
Yes.
Now, is that a part of the welfare program, or is that entirely coincidental? And to what extent is that the socially causative factor of the phenomenon you're describing?
Well, if I limit my description just to families that are female-headed, and I compare blacks and whites, then within that comparison, I see that the blacks are falling further and further behind. Yet if I pick almost any measure of more advantaged families, I find the blacks not only catching up, but in some cases overtaking and passing the whites. Mm-hmm. And there are a number of ways you can look at it and you get the same result. And what that suggests to me is that those blacks who have the skills, the experience, the education, and so on, are finding things much, much easier than ever before, whereas those where there's a risk involved in hiring them, that people aren't going to take that risk. I've seen her explain to me very explicitly in the case of women, and I suspected they wanted me to draw the same conclusion with respect to blacks. Universities have said, people at universities have said to me, we will not hire a woman who, for assistant professor, unless we're sure she's going to make an associate professor, because the cost of legal processes in case she doesn't is so high. I remember telling this to a woman who was a full professor to see what response I would get.
A black woman?
Black woman.
Mm-hmm.
And her response was, yes, that's the way I hire, because I also have no time to waste at the EOC and in the courtroom.
So therefore, they don't get the same running chance.
That's
white
right.
students. White,
if you're going to hire someone mediocre,
students.
The employers are safer hiring mediocre whites who can be thrown out if they don't work out without any repercussions.
Okay, now let me ask you this. Why, when we see on television and when we read the writings of the overwhelming number of acknowledged black leaders, is there no more thoughtful is no thoughtful attention given to such analyses as your own? Is it because they are simply wedded to the notion that there is a political solution, or is it because victimization is the easiest way for them to account for their plight? What is the dominant reason?
Well, both of them. Because clearly if there is no political solution, then what use are political leaders? People often emphasize to me the enormous importance of leadership for any ethnic group to get ahead. And my response is often, name me 3 Japanese American leaders. And no one has yet been able to do it. But so leadership itself, if you have the vision that I have, then leadership itself becomes much less important. And for a leader to say that leadership isn't important is like, you know, a Cadillac saying it doesn't matter what car you buy.
Well, all right, suppose we take the word leadership away from the political context. Gandhi was both. Martin Luther King was both. Now, he had political objectives, no question about that. But having achieved those political objectives on the basis of what you know about Martin Luther King, would he now be saying the same kind of thing that Ben Hooks and others are saying, or would he be saying the kind of thing you're saying?
Oh, it's impossible to know, obviously. Certainly, I think it's painful for me to hear Ben Hooks mentioned in the same breath with Martin Luther King. But I think that the black leadership that is currently being so much criticized, I haven't joined in that for one reason, that I think that the declining quality of that leadership is a symptom rather than a cause. That is, if we were in a situation where there were dire and important problems to be dealt with in the civil rights area, that would attract the brightest and the best of the rising generation of blacks, and you would have a lot better people running these organizations than Ben Hooks and Margaret Bush Wilson. But I don't think that they are the problem. They are a symptom of the problem. I'm not sure I answered your question.
Well, let me put it another way. About 2 years ago, Jesse Jackson made a lot of headlines by saying, look, my people are very good at baseball and basketball. I don't see why they shouldn't be very good at math. And then he lectured them about the necessity to spend hours on homework rather than hours on television and so forth. He sounded very much like certain passages in your own book about self-training. Now, he was, when he said that, something of a leader.
Yes.
But you're insisting on a rather narrow meaning for the word leader. It's got to be sort of an office seeker.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, isn't he? You are a leader,
God
without being
us.
an office seeker. In the same sense that Freud was a leader, Darwin was a leader, a man of great influence.
Well, I thank you for the compliment. I'm not sure how much I can endorse the accuracy of it, but that's for other people. Yes, that was a very statesmanlike thing to say. However, again, my study of other countries suggests that is not what people want to hear. There was a politician in the Philippines in the 30s who pointed out that if the Filipinos were angry at the Chinese, who were dominant throughout the economy, even though they were a minority, and wanted to take over their positions, they would have to work the way the Chinese work. As hard as they work, save as hard, live as frugally, etc., etc. A storm of indignation fell upon this poor man, and no one else wanted to be in his position again. From there on out, people referred to the dominance of the Chinese as showing exploitation, because that really is much easier to deal with politically. So the political incentives are really towards saying what people want to hear. And even if you're not an office seeker, if you want to reach a particular audience, you try to reach them with things that they will listen to rather than things they won't listen to. And it's very tough. It's a much longer process to get people to hear the other kind of message.
And that
Jesse Jackson isn't saying that quite as much now as he was.
That's right, he's not.
And particularly now that he's running for office.
That's right. Hobgoblinization works better.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, now, George Gilder points to the study recently released by whatever foundation it was, showing this dramatic rise in single-parent black families, and also their failure during the past 10 years to keep pace with white families, and on the contrary, how black families with two parents have done so well. In other words, the Sowell thesis. But he blames welfare for this. Do you blame welfare so much for that? How does welfare cause a black father to desert his family?
Well, part of it is desertion, but part of it is that the family never existed in the first place. When you're talking about teenage girls who get pregnant and never had a man in the house, well, not living, you see, there's not even a question of desertion.
Well, but when the figures rise as dramatically as they have done by 15 percentage points, what is it that's happening now that wasn't happening then? Just plain more sex, more teenage sex?
Yes, and that's happening, I think, in the society at large, part of the general degeneration of standards in American society.
Well, would a corollary of your proposition that the more we engage in affirmative action, the less we succeed, be that the more we teach sex education, the less we learn?
Oh, absolutely. That what is amazing to me is how many propositions there are that are sacred without a speck of evidence and in utter defiance of all evidence. That sex education was promoted on the grounds that this will reduce illegitimacy, teenage pregnancy, which I think is more important than the legal status of the children, and it would also reduce venereal disease. And of course, it was instituted, and teenage pregnancy and venereal disease have shot up through the roof. I have seen practically no one say, let us reconsider this. We have become wedded to certain non-empirical propositions that no matter what happens, these doctrines are so, and they are not to be questioned.
So that if we don't succeed with affirmative action, we need more affirmative action.
I was told that this very morning. I pointed, it reminded me of the alcoholic who wakes up with a hangover and figures he has to have a drink to get over this. Yes, there's a tremendous range of these things, not only in the racial area, but throughout the whole social thinking today.
Well, now, do you find that political activism, which you did not deplore in respect of getting rid of Jim Crow,
yes,
political activism of the kind that we see today, you find an inverse relationship between people who engage in politics and people who economically achieve, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because there's a dissipation of effort, or because you end up concentrating on the wrong things?
Well, historically, those groups that have had alternative methods of rising have chosen those methods. The Chinese in Southeast Asia are, again, a classic example of this. They have avoided politics like the plague, and they have come in usually poor and gone out usually prosperous. In the United States, Germans in colonial America were actually fined because they would refuse to serve in offices to which they had been elected or appointed. Jews in most countries, even when they've been allowed to enter the political process, have done so very late in the game, usually long after they have risen to prosperity by some alternative means. It makes perfect sense in terms of your options. That clearly, if you can do one thing well, you don't want to do the other thing. But if there's not the entrepreneurship there, there's not the capital there, then of course this is a very lucrative thing.
Is it a matter of the ergs of energy devoted, or is it simply a matter of the kind of understanding stimulated? Surely if somebody spends 2 hours a day in political activism, he's not castrating himself as an effective economic human being, right? It's only if he gets to think politically about his economic situation that there's that ultimate self-destruction, isn't it?
Except that if he's going to spend 2 hours a day in politics, he's going to have a pretty strong orientation in that field. People don't spend 2 hours a day doing anything unless that's something that they're oriented toward.
They're going to politicize their job and politicize their relationship with their employers and so on and so forth.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Now, you mentioned in your book that perhaps the best example of the relevance of human capital is the rebuilding of Japan and Germany after the war, right?
Yes.
Your point being that there they were defeated countries with no capital, with no credit.
No physical capital.
No physical capital, and no credit.
Yes.
And here they are.
That's right. Well, John Stuart, this is not a new thing, although we talk about the German miracle and Japanese miracle. John Stuart Mill in the middle of the 19th century pointed out that countries do often have almost miraculous recoveries from devastations of war. He argued that the physical capital is going to wear out anyway, and it's going to have to be replaced anyway. And what really matters is, do they have the human capital to replace the physical capital? Conversely, you may have all sorts of transfer programs in which vast amounts of physical capital change hands, either because of foreign aid programs or because of confiscations, nationalizations of foreign enterprises, and so forth. And yet, if the people who acquire this capital don't have the human capital to maintain it and reproduce it, it's only a matter of time before it begins to rust, to wear out, need spare parts, etc. And you've had a one-shot confiscation, but it really hasn't done anything in the long run.
Is there kind of a natural entropy that whittles away at human capital, or are you satisfied that it can be self-generating, as for instance seems to be in Switzerland, doesn't it?
Yes, there is a tendency of this human capital to sort of be like water seeking its own level. That is, in a country where there's a great deal of a certain kind of skill, that skill will not be as productive as in some other country where it's scarce. And so you, for example, find the British developing the steel industry and the railroads, and then they'll move to Germany to build steel industries and railroads in Germany, and even to man them in the early stage, because there were no qualified Germans, if you can use those kinds of terms.